Okay, good afternoon everyone, and it's a great honour to be asked to speak about the modern situation in Antarctica, because I'm definitely not an Antarctic historian, as you'll very quickly find out. I've been sailing down there for the best part of 20 years, joined the British Antarctic Survey as a navigator to begin with, worked my way up to captain purely by accident, really. So someone has to die first. That's how you become a captain in the Antarctic. It's a very interesting place to navigate, so I'm going to try and show you this afternoon some of the conditions, or what we actually do now, and how things have changed over the years. I must admit, the Bellingshausen voyage, speaking as a sailor, not as a historian, Bellingshausen's voyage was absolutely incredible. When you think what they did in those tiny ships, Cook and Bellingshausen, they are the guys going down there. They didn't really know what they were going into. The one big difference, I think, between modern ships and the old sailing ships was exactly that. The one thing you're not going to run out of in Antarctica is wind, but you will run out of fuel. And that, I think, is the biggest difference now, in that we can't take our ships down for the months on end that the old guys did, because eventually you're going to run out of fuel. We've only got an endurance of possibly 2 months, if you're lucky. That depends on the ice conditions that you encounter. So what do we got now? This is a kind of British Antarctic sector, as we like to call it anyway. And of course, bases in the Antarctic that we have, Sydney Islands, 2 bases on South Georgia, nothing over in the South Sandwich Islands, but we do go there, as you'll see. The largest base down at Rothera, south end of Adelaide, a small base on Fossil Bluff, accessible by air on Alexander Island. And the other 2 bases, Sky Blue and Halley. I'll be taking you to those later on. This is the modern research ship, which is about to be replaced. Now we have 2 ships, or we had 2 ships until very recently. We just decommissioned one of them, the Ernest Shackleton. She's returned to her owners in Norway. This one's actually owned by the survey, James Clark Ross. She's a purpose-built research ship, 100 metres long, so 2.5 times bigger than Bellingshausen's ship. Now, I'd like you to just take note of this small platform on top of the mast. The bridge height in the James Clark Ross is about 15 metres. I'm going to show you another photograph now, because to get to Antarctica you have to cross the Southern Ocean. And I took this one night when I was driving the ship. It was actually the 3rd mate who took this photograph. He was standing right beside me. And you can see the top of the mast just below the top of the wave there. The top of that mast is roughly 20 metres above sea level. Admittedly, we were dipping down into the trough, but that's a fairly big wave. When I live in an island off the west coast of Scotland, and when I'm travelling there, people say to me, "Oh, it was a bit rough in the river today," and I said, "No, it wasn't." So hopefully, can I ask how many people here today are going south on the yachts? Not many do. Yeah. Well, hopefully you won't be meeting too many waves. That's quite an exceptional one, actually. So, yeah. Okay. Of course, Bellingshausen didn't have any access to the information that we have today. We know exactly, more or less, how the sea ice is going to change throughout the season. The best time to go is, speaking as a sailor, if you're going to get to somewhere dodgy, is to go when the ice is decreasing. So if you get stuck, and you will get stuck eventually, at least you know you've got a couple of weeks to wait until the sea ice reaches minimum. Then at least you've got a chance of getting out. 1 or 2 of our scientific voyages have actually gone in quite late. That first photograph I showed you was taken not far away from Peter the First Island, near Thurston. And we were actually at the back end of February when we went in there, and our captain decided it was too risky in those days to go into Pine Island Bay, which we were trying to access to get a submarine into the ice shelf there. So if you're going into Antarctica, tip number one, go in when the ice is decreasing. We've got much better information on the ships these days. We can download these small diagrams from Bremen University. They're quite small file sizes, so if you've got a reasonable interconnection on the ship, you can get these. And I've used these day in, day out for the last few years. Here you see the situation in the spring, or the winter anyway. In the spring, you can see the ice is decreasing. December is when we usually start thinking about getting into Adelaide Island towards the end of December. We can normally, if you're lucky, get through to Rothera Base. It's possibly a bit early for Halley. This is the situation later on. You can see how much the ice has decreased. The trick with Halley, if you can see the Weddell Sea up here top right, the Weddell Sea is never ice-free. The trick with Halley is to go down and try and sneak in behind. You can see that open water, the blue open water there. Sneak in behind and then can get to the ice shelf in the Weddell Sea gyre down there. John, if you want to chip in at any point, please feel free to do so, because you've seen all this before. Of course, on the ships we have much better weather forecasts these days. We have a forecaster at Rothera, because we're operating aircraft into Antarctica. We need to know what the upper atmosphere is doing, as well as the surface wind and the surface visibility for the ships. This is one of my favourite photographs of the continent. It's obviously taken from space. You can see the tip of South America here, South Georgia here. South Georgia is normally accessible. There are occasions when you get a lot of bergs around there, especially when one of the Weddell Sea ice shelves breaks up and carries the ice to the north and across to the South Sandwich Islands. That shows you how much the continent increases in size during the winter. Okay, sometimes if you're lucky, if you're trying to get into Halley, which is on the Ruut ice shelf down here, it's further north actually, you'll be trying to judge exactly where to go with the ship, and we can contact Cambridge, or even today with a better internet connection on the ships, we can sometimes download these ourselves. This is a polar satellite view, and you can see there the ice is clearly marked, so that makes my job as a ship's captain relatively easy, because I know exactly what I'm going into as we go south. So that's a pretty good situation ship-wise, because we've got a good swatch of clear water between the ice shelf and the pack to the west. But of course Bellingshausen and Cook, they didn't have any of this stuff, so they were going blind. We can even these days put the ship's position on download these files, put them on a computer, and you can just see the ship's position up at the ice edge there. This was the situation in 2015 when I actually failed to get through to Halley, because I was trying to get, this was the autumn when usually it's ice-free down as far as Halley Base down here. And in 2015 the Weddell Sea was just choked with ice. So I had to turn back, and the base remained unrelieved by ship that year. That's when you thank your lucky stars for having aircraft. Also on the ship, you can, this is Svalbard by the way, it's not in Antarctica if you're wondering. Also on the ship we have a system called DartCom, which will give us a direct visual indication of where the ice is. What you have here, the Leopard Islands. The white stuff is cloud. The yellow stuff to the north is all pack ice. But the only thing with DARTCOM is you do need clear weather to show the captain what's what. If it's cloudy, it doesn't really work. So we have all these things helping us these days. Of course, the old sailors didn't have any of this. On a smaller scale, you can detect pack ice by radar. So this is the radar picture. I took one evening. The James Clark Ross bridge height of 15 meters, radar a bit higher up in the mast, but I would say you can't really see beyond 3 miles from the ship. Anything beyond 3 miles is pure guesswork. So unless you have satellite information, and that's always old, it's always at least a couple of days old, you're basically down to radar, and beyond 3 miles you're guessing. You do run into trouble, and of course when you get closer to an Antarctic survey base, of course the pilots love to have an excuse to fly. They will come out, and we were actually steering through to Rollera when this photograph was taken. Obviously 2 twin otters were sent up, and the pilots can do ice observations for you. They can make your job a hell of a lot easier by telling you where the ice is and what's what. A lot of that depends on the pilot who's flying the plane, by the way. Some of the pilot's interpretations from the air are extremely debatable. Because they'll radio you down and say, oh, you lazily get through that. And they say, no, it won't. So, okay, well, here's the reality. Trying to get through to Halley now. This is actually navigable ice. Of course, Bellingshausen, Cook, they wouldn't have been able to get anywhere near this sort of stuff. So we're navigating here. What you have on the right hand side is ice blink. You can see basically see the reflection of the ice from the continent over there. And on the left hand side, the port hand side of the ship, just on the left hand side of the mast on the horizon, you can see water sky. So that's eventually what you're doing. You're navigating by Mark 1 eyeball, which is what the old sailors had to do. Of course, on a sailing ship, you just wouldn't contemplate going into conditions like that. Even on our ships, that's still pretty heavy stuff. Just a few photographs now. This is the Willis Islands that Bellingshausen passed on his way down to the south of South Georgia. Quite spectacular group of islands. You can see Cape Demidov here in this chart. On the south side of South Georgia, until recently, it wasn't well charted at all, so we're using fairly old charts overlaid with modern GPS signals. Now, one of the problems with that is that although the shape of the land is correct, it's not often that you get the old charts to correspond with the modern GPS world model, WGS84. So there are shifts to apply. And I'd caution anyone who's taking a yacht down there not to rely on GPS, because you'll get into trouble if you rely on it too much, especially in the lesser charted areas. We're okay here because I know that myself that I'm in Wilson Harbour. I know what shifts I've got to apply to the chart. I'm happy, quite safe, but at the end of the day, I would never go into a place like Wilson Harbour without using radar or taking bearings using compass. Anyone who relies on GPS in the old Antarctic areas is asking for trouble. This is Clark Rocks, which we've already mentioned. That was the kind of stepping off point for Bellingshausen when he set off towards the South Sandwich Islands. I would say he was fairly lucky when he got to Zavodovsky, because you can do a lot anywhere in Antarctica if you get clear weather or clear water. So here you see Zavodovsky in relatively ice-free conditions. First time I approached Zavodovsky was in 1997, no? And it wasn't clear, it was surrounded by pack. Now, he would be able, in these conditions, he would have been able to get through this, I think, in the Vostok. I don't really know, but I think he would have made some progress. However, I don't think they would have been able to land on the small ships, the small boats. They were fairly lucky, I think, when they went there, that they were able to find a landing space initially, because it's quite rocky, isn't it, Bob, over there? And I can only assume that the weather was suitable for them to facilitate a landing. So I would say a bit of luck in Bellingshausen's part there. That's a close-up of Zavodovsky. You can clearly see the crater there. I must say, it's one of the most spectacular islands you're ever going to witness. We were actually across there looking for krill. Our scientist at the time was concerned with examining krill DNA. So it was a good excuse to go all over the Antarctic, try and catch as krill from as many locations as possible. Okay, this is Vindication Island, and I haven't examined Bellingshausen's account in the greatest of detail, so I'm quite sure he would have seen those striped bergs at some stage. These are a peculiarity, really, of the Weddell Sea bergs. You get these different formation of the ice, these great layerings that make them look like boiled sweets. So I must say, the South Sandwich Islands, you almost feel as if you're at the end of the earth when you're across there. That's certainly what it feels like. This is Visokoi in clear weather. We were extremely lucky when we went there that this was taken in May, in fact, late on in the season. We were surveying the group of islands with a view to producing a map, because the bathymetry of the South Sandwich Islands wasn't really that well known until recently. Further south, this is the Thimble ice shelf. Now, I think this is what Bellingshausen might have seen. He certainly would have seen it if the ice hadn't stopped him getting any further south. So this is the Thimble ice shelf in completely clear weather. He was just unlucky, I think, that he didn't get further south that time. But always difficult to tell, are you looking at a berg or are you looking at an ice shelf? If you see the whole ice shelf stretching away, you're in no doubt. Right. Just as a side story, if you go 17 kilometres under the Thimble ice shelf, you'll find a submarine. Might not be 17 kilometres now, but it certainly was when we lost it. It was one of the early auto subs, worth, I don't know what do you reckon they were worth, John? Maybe $1 million or so? Yeah, anyway. We'd failed to get into Pine Island Bay because of the ice stopping us. So we thought, we'll go across to the Thimble ice shelf, and the scientists wanted to put the submarine under the ice, the auto sub under the ice, and examine the floating point when the ice shelf actually comes off the land and starts floating. Great scientific interest. So after several tests in relatively clear water, we put it under the pack ice. It always came back. Hopes were high. It went under there, never to be seen again. So it was trained at that time, when it got into trouble, to drop a little emergency beacon and surface gradually, call for help. But it's sitting under there somewhere, even to this day, or under an iceberg, as far as we know. Okay, this is just a lump of ice. You're going to get these all over the Antarctic. They occur sometimes almost at random, and I would classify this as one of the most dangerous bits of ice you can encounter, because you're probably going to be lucky to see this on radar in these sea conditions. Quite a rough sea. This is a growler, really. If you're in a yacht, keep your eyes open, because especially at night, that piece of ice could really spoil your day. That would, if you hit that at speed on one of our modern ships, that would do you some damage. That's a hard lump, that. So you still have to be careful. These things haven't changed. The big icebergs like this one, they're no problem at all. You just, you're in clear water, you just sail around them. Then you come to the more fractured ice, when you get the icebergs like this, more pack ice surrounding them or lumps of ice falling off the icebergs themselves. Much more dangerous conditions, especially for small ships like Bellingshausens and Cooks. Much more dangerous on a yacht as well, of course. This was taken over by, not too far from Alexander Island. I do somewhere have a photograph of Peter I Island, but I couldn't find it for this talk. But if you try and imagine taking two small sailing ships through ice like this, you know, the big icebergs, you give them a wide berth and they're not too much of a problem really, unless you get too close to them. But once you're sailing in between them all, you've got all these smaller chunks lying around in the water. Some of them are probably as big as your ship or bigger, and they're going to do you a lot of damage if you hit them the wrong way. And also, if the conditions are calm, how do you get out of the way? And the current, you know, the current is a problem. So I'm full of admiration really for these early sailors who took ships into these conditions. Not so bad if you have an engine. So what's it all about anyway? Well, this is the map that was finally produced of the South Sandwich Islands. This was a paper published in 2016, so you could say that this map took the best part of 250 years to produce, and it's probably the most modern bathymetric map that we have of the seabed over in that vicinity. So you can see the rate of progress is slowly marching forward, a bit faster now with satellites, but at the end of the day you still have to get a ship in there to give things under the sea a good detailed looking at. This is a compilation not only of the work of the Antarctic Survey but also of the German ships as well, and anyone else who's ever been across there with an echo sounder running. The Navy have a good facility to put these things into the one source these days. Right, this is Cape Vostok, which is a place that not many people go to unless they have a reason, and again we were doing some survey work across there with Autosub. So that's what Cape Vostok looks like, quite a spectacular piece of rock, and that's the ship puts it into scale. It's quite amazing when you're on the ship to look at these rocky pinnacles, and you know, just quite spectacular. Okay, James Clark Ross, seen from the hill at Sydney Island, in fact. But again, try and imagine what it would be like in those conditions in a small sailing ship, because you've got some fairly big lumps of ice around there. And again, in conditions like this, when it's calm, the only way to get a sailing ship out of the way is by towing it with the small boats. If it's windy, of course, you have a bigger problem because the wind determines where you can go, and sometimes the ice has different ideas. Main point of the whole thing is that no matter how good your ship is, nature's still in charge, very much so down in Antarctica. And we're all trying to push our ships, no matter which ship we go down on, we're all trying to push them to the limits and take them as far as we can. Just more ice. Okay, this is a leopard seal, which Bellingshausen found once on one. They didn't recognize it, did they, Bob? They were wondering exactly what it was. The leopard seals are quite different from they're very reptilian looking, and they're quite dangerous animals. So don't go poking off the stick because you'll probably end up with your fingers missing. Unfortunately, we had an unfortunate incident a few years ago. One of our young marine biologists was killed by a leopard seal when she was snorkeling off Rothera Base. I think, were you there at the time, John?
Yeah, I
Yeah, yeah.
hard time.
Do you think it mistook her for a penguin?
No, what we believe is she was taken for a small seal.
Mm,
The leopard seal
mm,
came from deep, nobody saw it. It came up and grabbed her. She was wearing a wetsuit but no breathing
mm,
apparatus. So it would have seen a seal. Of course it was very hungry because it was a little one, so it shouldn't have been there at all.
mm.
Grabbed her and took her down to 70 metres.
Yeah,
You know that 'cause
yeah.
she was wearing a dive computer. Basically she drowned.
Yeah.
So any stories about her being eaten by a leopard seal
Mm.
are absolutely inaccurate.
Mm. They are definitely aggressive though, and
Well,
not
that's the
necessarily
only
towards humans.
example that we know
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
of a human being attacked by a leopard
Mm,
seal.
mm,
We did a very big research study before I would allow us to start diving again
mm,
to understand the interactions between humans and leopard seals. And that
Mm.
was published actually with the aid of Kirsty Brown's family. who
yes,
set
yeah.
up a fund to help fund the research.
Mm.
And you're much more likely to be killed by a hippopotamus than
Yes.
by a
Yes.
I joined that, and the one thing, I was a diver down there, South Georgia, the one thing that shook us all up was all the incidents we had had. I was really cut off from shore by leopards.
Mm,
They were all in the winter.
mm,
So within a month of June, July, Kirsty Brown being, all the odd incidents we had.
mm,
In Sydney, where they had dived with them quite a lot, they didn't get them in the winter because of the pack ice.
mm,
So there may be some seasonal breeding.
Mm,
We
mm.
don't know that.
But certainly this leopard seal shouldn't have been as far south as
yeah.
Rother is. They just are not there. They're north.
No, but the South Georgia books also say they
That's where they go to.
and they can be quite aggressive.
Yeah,
and
I know.
savage.
Interesting. Anyway, they even just to look at them, they are obviously predators. So
They have a way of looking at you.
yeah, yeah, yes, they do. Yes,
I used to hunt seals for dog food. and
yeah, yeah,
I used to keep quite a long way away from them.
yes, yeah, yeah. Okay, this is us again, an aerial shot, same day, going through to Rother. It shows you the kind of ice, and now James Clark Ross can easily handle that sort of pack. It's not too difficult for us these days, but of course, try to imagine going there and trying to sight the continent tantalisingly close, just a few miles beyond the horizon, or even on the horizon. That ice would stop a small sailing ship, no problem at all. You wouldn't get in there at all. This is I put this in because it's Alexander Island. We were doing some snow and ice studies across there, putting men down on the floes. What you have here is the fast ice that separates Alexander Island from Adelaide and King George VI Sound. It's broken up in a very angular fashion and it's now drifting around. We can actually get the ship through this, but only by treating it like a ping pong ball, because this ice is very hard and you obviously have to try and nudge these floes out the way. To make any sensible progress, your speed will be reduced to something like 1 or 2 knots, and you'll be literally bouncing from floe to floe as you go through. It's quite spectacular feeling, but again, I would very much hesitate to take a sailing ship anywhere into waters like that, because you could easily get trapped. And here we are, in fact, trapped. What we're doing here is, this was in the year 2000, trying to get through to Rothera. It was quite a heavy ice year in December that year, and we're in fact backing and ramming here. So we're backing the ship up 2 or 3 lengths, 2 or 3 ship lengths. Ramming the telegraph full ahead and ramming the ice as hard as it's possible to do with the ship and getting nowhere. So it was 35 days more or less stopped. Not entirely stopped. We were able to break out at one point, come north, get some scientists off at Palmer Station, the American station, go back down, get stuck again for several more days. That's okay, as long as you're stuck in a relatively bird-free area, clear of islands. The only trouble with backing and ramming is that your fuel consumption will go up from, say, 12 cubic meters a day, 12, 15 to 35 cubes a day if you're doing this all the time. So you can't really maintain that sort of fuel consumption and then leave yourself a sufficient reserve to get out. So you only really want to be backing and ramming when you think you're going to achieve something. If you're not going to achieve anything in the ice, the best thing to do is just sit and wait for conditions to improve. That brings me back to my original point. If you're going in anywhere difficult, go in fairly early before the minimum, because if you're in after the minimum, everything is going to get worse and you're going to be spending the winter there. Okay, we'll finish there, Bob, shall we? This is just a picture of icing that you still get on modern ships, and you still have to send men out. Of course, the stability is a bit better these days, but you still have to occasionally send men out and chip away with hammers, get rid of the ice on deck. The other thing I would like to say as a sailor is we've heard a lot of history today, but you've got to remember the captains on the ships are not just dealing with ships, they're dealing with the crew. And that is the biggest issue, I think, on any Antarctic voyage. These guys were going away for years from home. Now, the British Antarctic Survey find it difficult to recruit sailors because the voyage lengths were, in my case, a maximum of 8 to 9 months. But now, they're down to 2 because people now are not really prepared to put in the graft that the old sailors did. They're not prepared to leave home for months on end with no internet for 2 years. And that's possibly the biggest change in the last 200 years. Okay? Thanks very much.